The narrow cobblestone streets of Verona gleamed under the pale glow of the afternoon sun, still slick from a morning drizzle. Matteo Russo pedaled his battered old bicycle along the winding alleys, a large insulated delivery bag strapped to his back. The brakes squeaked at every stop, and the chain rattled like it had been begging for retirement for years. But this bicycle was Matteo's livelihood, his only means of earning enough to pay rent for his tiny attic apartment and to cover the hospital bills for his younger sister, Sofia. At 24, Matteo had learned the art of survival the hard way. His father had abandoned the family years ago, leaving his mother to raise both children alone. And when she passed away unexpectedly, Matteo had to grow up overnight. School became a distant memory, replaced by a string of odd jobs: dishwashing, sweeping floors, carrying boxes at the market, anything to keep food on the table. Now, his days were spent delivering food from the busy trattorias and cafes across the city to people who barely noticed the boy behind the uniform. That particular afternoon, the rain had made business slow. Orders were few and far between, and Matteo was grateful when his phone buzzed with another delivery request. It was from a popular cafe, Cafe Lorenzo, where the scent of fresh espresso could make even the most hurried passerby pause. Matteo knew the owner, Signora Bianca, who often gave him leftover pastries at the end of the day. She handed him a paper bag filled with warm focaccia sandwiches and a small box of tiramisu. "This one's for a new customer," she said, scribbling an address on the delivery slip. "A signora who just moved into the neighborhood." Matteo checked the address and raised an eyebrow. It was in Via dei Fiori, one of the most expensive streets in Verona. He couldn't imagine why someone who could afford to live there would be ordering food instead of dining in a restaurant. Still, a job was a job. The ride there was uphill, and by the time Matteo reached the building, his legs were burning and his breath came in short bursts. The building itself was a masterpiece of old-world architecture, marble columns framing a grand wooden door, with ivy climbing up the stone walls. A gold-plated nameplate read, "Isabella Moretti." He rang the bell, and moments later the door opened. Standing before him was a woman in her late 20s, her beauty understated yet striking. She had chestnut-brown hair that framed her face in soft waves, and her eyes, a deep warm hazel, seemed to hold a quiet melancholy. She wore a cream-colored cardigan over a simple dress, and in her hands was a book, the pages marked by her slender fingers. "You must be the delivery boy," she said, her voice gentle but distant. Matteo handed her the bag. "Your order, signora." She opened the bag, then looked slightly puzzled. "I think there's been a mistake. I didn't order any food." Matteo frowned, pulling the receipt from his pocket. The name and address matched. "This is Via dei Fiori, number 12, right?" "Yes, but I didn't place an order." She hesitated, then gave a small smile. "Perhaps it's a gift from someone." Matteo didn't know what to say. The cafe had already charged the supposed customer, but if she insisted she didn't order it, he couldn't just leave without clarifying. He reached for his phone to call the cafe, but Isabella stopped him. "You know what? Keep it," she said, handing the bag back to him. "Or better yet, take it to someone who might need it more." Her kindness caught him off guard. He didn't want to admit it, but he hadn't eaten since breakfast, and the scent of warm focaccia was making his stomach growl. Yet, before he could respond, Isabella tilted her head thoughtfully. "Wait," she said softly. "Have you eaten?" Matteo blinked. Not yet." "Then please have it," she said, pushing the bag back into his hands. "It would be a shame for it to go to waste." He hesitated. Delivery rules were strict. They weren't supposed to accept food from customers, let alone eat it. But her sincerity was disarming. Eventually he nodded. "Thank you, signora. Call me Isabella," she said with a faint smile. Matteo stepped back, preparing to leave, but something about her eyes made him linger. There was a loneliness in them, the kind that no amount of luxury could hide. He almost asked if she was all right, but decided against it. Instead, he gave a polite nod and mounted his bicycle. That night, after sharing the food with Sofia, Matteo found himself thinking about the mysterious woman in Via dei Fiori. He wondered why she lived alone in such a grand building, why her smile seemed tinged with sadness, and why her voice lingered in his mind long after the day had ended. The next afternoon, fate intervened. Another order came through, this time from a different cafe, but the delivery address was the same: Isabella Moretti, Via dei Fiori. Matteo's heart skipped a beat. When he arrived, she greeted him at the door, this time with a softer expression. "You again," she said, as if amused by the coincidence. "Yes, I mean Isabella," he replied awkwardly. She invited him inside to place the food on the kitchen counter, explaining that she had just returned from a trip abroad and was too tired to cook. The apartment was tastefully decorated. High ceilings, antique furniture, and walls lined with books. But despite its beauty, it felt oddly quiet, almost as if time moved more slowly inside. As Matteo placed the bag down, he caught sight of a black and white photograph on the table. A younger Isabella, smiling alongside a man in a tailored suit. They looked happy, but the frame was slightly dusty, as though it hadn't been touched in a while. "You live here alone?" he asked before he could stop himself. Her eyes flickered, and she gave a small nod. For now. Matteo wanted to ask more, but he knew it wasn't his place. Still, as he left, he felt a strange pull, an unspoken connection he couldn't explain. And somewhere deep inside, he had the faintest feeling that this wouldn't be the last time their paths crossed. The rain had returned to Verona the following week, turning the cobblestone streets into a mosaic of shimmering reflections. Matteo pedaled carefully, the tires of his old bicycle slipping slightly on the slick stones. He had grown used to the unpredictable weather. It was just another part of his long workdays, but today felt different. His deliveries kept taking him back toward Via dei Fiori, as though the city itself was conspiring to push him into Isabella's path again. It happened on a Thursday evening. The sky was a deep, moody gray, and the scent of rain mixed with the aroma of freshly baked bread in Matteo's delivery bag. The order slip read Via dei Fiori, number 12. He almost smiled when he saw it. When Isabella opened the door this time, she didn't look surprised to see him. In fact, she seemed relieved. "You again," she said, a faint warmth in her voice. "I think we're starting to make this a habit." Matteo grinned shyly. "It seems fate is choosing my delivery route for me." She stepped aside to let him in. "Come. It's raining too hard for you to stand outside." The apartment felt less cold than before. A lamp in the corner cast a soft golden light, and the faint sound of piano music played from an old record player. Matteo placed the food on the kitchen counter and prepared to leave, but Isabella lingered, almost as if she didn't want the moment to end. "Matteo," she said suddenly, "do you have somewhere to be right away?" He hesitated. His shift wasn't over, but the next delivery hadn't yet been assigned. "Not immediately. Then stay for a while. At least until the rain lets up." Matteo wasn't used to this kind of invitation. Most customers barely looked at him, let alone asked him to sit. He pulled out a chair at her small dining table, feeling oddly out of place in his damp jacket and worn jeans. Isabella, on the other hand, moved gracefully, pouring tea into delicate porcelain cups. As they sat, she asked him about his work, his family, and his life in Verona. He spoke about Sofia, his 16-year-old sister, and how she had dreams of becoming a nurse. He explained how his mother's passing had forced him into the role of provider. "I suppose you've never really had time to think about what you want," she observed gently. Matteo shrugged. "What I want doesn't matter as much as what my sister needs. Her future is my priority." Isabella nodded slowly, her hazel eyes unreadable. "You remind me of someone I once knew," she said softly, though she didn't elaborate. He noticed her gaze drift toward the black and white photograph on the table, the same one he'd seen on his last visit. This time, curiosity got the better of him. "The man in the picture, is he?" she interrupted, her smile faint but tinged with sadness. "Someone from my past." Matteo didn't push. Instead, they sipped their tea in silence for a moment, listening to the rain against the windows. Then Isabella stood. "Wait here," she said, disappearing into another room. She returned with a small paper bag. "For your sister. You mentioned she likes sweets. These are from a patisserie near the river. The best in Verona." Matteo hesitated before accepting it. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," she said, her tone leaving no room for refusal. "Consider it a thank you for bringing a little company into my day." He left that night with the bag tucked carefully into his delivery pack, the rain now only a light drizzle. Sophia's eyes lit up when she saw the pastries, and Matteo found himself telling her about Isabella, though he left out the way her eyes seemed to look right through him, as if she could see past every layer he kept hidden. The days passed, and their meetings became more frequent. Sometimes Isabella ordered food just to have an excuse to see him. Other times, she would be waiting outside her building with an umbrella when Matteo happened to pass by, claiming she was just out for a walk, but ending up talking to him for half an hour. One chilly afternoon, she called him directly. "I need a favor," she said. Matteo was already between deliveries. "What is it?" "I bought too many groceries," she explained. "I can't carry them up the stairs alone. Would you help me?" He agreed without hesitation. When he arrived, she was standing on the sidewalk beside 2 heavy paper bags filled with fresh produce, bread, and a bottle of wine. "I should have thought this through," she admitted with a sheepish smile. He carried the bags up the stairs with ease. In her kitchen, she began unpacking them. "You should stay for dinner," she said suddenly. "It's the least I can do for your help." Matteo started to protest, but she waved him off. "You've been delivering food to me for weeks. Let me return the favor." That evening was unlike anything Matteo had experienced in a long time. Isabella cooked a simple pasta dish with fresh basil and tomato sauce, and they shared it with a glass of wine. The conversation flowed easily, touching on everything from favorite books to childhood memories. At one point she laughed, a soft melodic sound, and Matteo realized he hadn't heard her laugh before. It lit up her entire face, erasing the melancholy he had sensed when they first met. After dinner, as he prepared to leave, Isabella walked him to the door. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For reminding me what it's like to enjoy someone's company without expectations." Her words lingered in Matteo's mind all the way home. Over the next few weeks, their bond deepened. Isabella learned about Matteo's small apartment, the creaky stairs that led to it, and how he sometimes worked 16 hours straight to make ends meet. Matteo, in turn, learned that Isabella had once been married, the man in the photograph, but had lost him in an accident 2 years ago. She had moved to Verona hoping for a fresh start, but the loneliness had followed her like a shadow. One evening, as snowflakes began to fall over the city, Matteo arrived at her building without a delivery bag. He had saved enough to buy a small gift, a wool scarf in a soft shade of cream. "It's for when you go walking," he said shyly as she unwrapped it. Her eyes softened. "It's beautiful, Matteo. You didn't have to." "I know," he said, echoing her own words from weeks ago. "Consider it a thank you for changing my routine into something I look forward to." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt warmer than the scarf in her hands. She stepped closer, her gaze searching his face as though she was trying to decide something. But then she smiled and broke the moment with a light laugh. "Would you like to stay for dinner?" Snow had blanketed Verona in a soft white glow, muffling the city's usual bustle. Matteo's bicycle lay unused against the wall of his attic apartment. The icy streets were too dangerous for riding, so deliveries had slowed. But tonight he wasn't working. He was making his way, on foot, toward Via dei Fiori, carrying nothing but his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets, a nervous energy building in his chest. When Isabella opened the door, she looked different. Not in appearance. She still wore the same effortless elegance, but in her demeanor, there was a brightness in her eyes that Matteo hadn't seen before. "I was hoping you'd come," she said, stepping aside to let him in. The scent of roasted vegetables and fresh bread filled the air. "I made dinner." They ate by the light of a single candle on the dining table, the kind of scene Matteo had only seen in the windows of fancy restaurants while delivering food. The flickering flame cast soft shadows across Isabella's face, highlighting the curve of her smile. At first, their conversation was light. Stories about Sophia's school projects, Isabella's favorite books, the snow outside. But as the meal went on, her tone grew more serious. "Matteo," she began, setting her wine glass down, "do you remember the day we met? When I told you I hadn't ordered any food?" He nodded. "Of course. That was unusual." She leaned back slightly, her eyes locked on his. "It wasn't a mistake. I did order it. I just didn't want to admit it then." Matteo frowned in confusion. "Why?" "Because I was lonely," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'd been in this apartment for months, avoiding people, telling myself I didn't need anyone. But that day, I realized how much I wanted to see a human face. Someone who didn't already know my story, someone who wouldn't look at me with pity. So I ordered food, hoping for a little human connection." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He remembered the sadness in her eyes that day, the way she'd insisted he keep the food. "I didn't think you'd keep coming back," she said softly, a hint of a smile on her lips. "But you did. And somewhere along the way, the silence in this apartment stopped feeling so heavy." Matteo's throat tightened. He didn't know how to respond, so he reached across the table, letting his fingers brush against hers. She didn't pull away. The rest of the evening passed in quiet comfort, the kind where words weren't necessary. After dinner, they stood by the window, watching the snow fall. Isabella wrapped the cream-colored scarf Matteo had given her around her neck. "It's warm," she said, tugging it gently. "Just like you said." Matteo chuckled. "It suits you." She turned to face him fully, her expression unreadable. "You've changed my life, Matteo. More than you know." He blinked. "Me? Yes. You reminded me that the world isn't something to hide from, that there's kindness in unexpected places. And you made me remember what it's like to feel hope." The moment stretched between them, the soft glow from the street lamps casting a halo around her hair. Matteo felt the pull, the same one he'd felt from the very first day, and this time he didn't resist. He leaned in and she met him halfway. The kiss was gentle, unhurried, and yet it carried the weight of everything unspoken between them. In the weeks that followed, their lives became entwined in ways Matteo never imagined. Isabella began joining him on walks through the city, even visiting Sophia, who warmed to her instantly. She offered to help with Sophia's school fees, but Matteo hesitated, until she explained it wasn't charity, but a partnership. One afternoon, as they sat in a cafe near the river, Isabella surprised him with an envelope. Inside was a job offer, not as a delivery boy, but as the manager of a small bakery she had purchased. "I believe in you," she said simply. "You've worked hard for everyone else. Now it's time to work for yourself, and for us." Matteo's voice caught. "Isabella, this is too much." "No," she said, reaching across the table to take his hand. "This is exactly what you deserve. The day you gave me that food, the day you thought you were just doing your job, you gave me far more than a meal. You gave me back my life. Let me return the favor." Months later, the bakery opened, its windows glowing warmly against the cobblestone street. Matteo managed the day-to-day operations, while Isabella handled the finances and occasionally joined him behind the counter. Customers soon came to know them not just for the pastries, but for the way they laughed together, as though they had discovered some quiet secret the rest of the world had missed. And sometimes, when business slowed in the afternoons, Matteo would catch Isabella watching him with that same faint smile she'd worn the day they met. The day a poor delivery boy unknowingly brought free food to a lonely woman, and in doing so, set both their lives on a path they never expected. A path that they now knew they would walk together.